in for us?
They will see the room.
Not at the moment, no.
No, they will.
They will, yes. They will see the room. Yeah.
In Zoom.
In Zoom.
Okay. I'm gonna talk with the, yeah.
No worries, Sonia. Perfect.
Yeah, video, we have the videos. The videos. Let me check if we have a mic.
Just seeing it in regular mode, like where you would edit it and such. Not yet. Little bottom in the bottom right looks like a little slide, presentation. Oh yeah, very strange. Oh yeah, of course. Do you have a second screen set up or anything by any chance? Yeah, that might be why. Can you select which screen you're presenting on? That looks good. It's got the taskbar at the top, but I think that's good. It's much better than it was.
Hey guys, I'm leaving you now. Good luck.
Lovely. Okay. We'll go live very soon, and you should be able to see what I'm sending in a few minutes. Just got a holding slide up at the moment that says COP27 Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt 2020, joint MDB Pavilion. And yeah. Yeah, stay in the Zoom, and then I'll have you live. Just unmute yourself when you want to talk, and when you're not talking, just mute yourself, please, and that'll be great. No, you can have the video on. That's absolutely fine. If you want to turn it off, you feel free to turn it off. That's not a problem. All right. Thank you, guys.
So the microphone goes there. It's already on? Just switch on the mic when we're ready to go. So this finalizing, few seconds and we'll give you a sign.
Kevin is not yet here, but because he's supposed to deliver some opening remarks.
Former
I texted him, but
And Caroline?
I haven't tried her. Maybe they're trying to find the pavilion.
She has been here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be starting very, very shortly. We're just waiting for the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth of the African Development Bank to arrive as well. I think he's on his way. And maybe in the meantime, there's still a couple of free seats of everyone sort of just standing on the margins. Please feel free to take a seat and join us on this, I think it's going to be a very exciting session this afternoon. So we will be starting in 2-3 minutes, so just, well, bear with us. Thank you. Right. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, a very warm welcome here to the MDB Pavilion at COP27 for what's going to be a very exciting session entitled Renewable Energy for Climate Action, Socioeconomic Transformation in Africa. And we want to particularly also highlight the role that the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, SEFA, is playing in this regard. We all know the tremendous potential for renewables across the continent, whether that's wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, in the different parts of the continent. We also know that to date, if we look at the last 20 years, only 2% of global investments in renewables have gone to Africa, so that's clearly a narrative that we need to change. We also know that energy access is still a major issue across the continent. If we look at the latest data from the International Energy Agency, in fact, the situation is worsening. As a result of the multiple crises, more people are now without access to electricity than the preceding year. We're in fact almost back to the peak in terms of people without access to electricity of 2013. So clearly that's sort of a narrative that needs to change. We're not on track to meet SDG 7. Clearly this requires a collective effort from governments, development partners, donors, the private sector and civil society. And I think we will have an opportunity today during the session to discuss a number of these important issues. I would like to start the session while I hope that my Vice President will be able to join us, but I know we all have very busy agendas on Energy Day at COP. I would like to start with well, a couple of announcements that partners of the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa are going to make today. And first of all, I would like to ask the technical team to play a video message from Her Excellency, the Minister for International Development of Norway, Ann-Beat Tvinnereim. Oh, well, and I see the Vice President is coming late, but not too late. Kevin, I think with that, before we play the video, I think I'll hand over to you for opening remarks to kick us off in the session. Oh, right. I know it's very difficult to find sometimes the pavilions. Right. Okay, Kevin. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm really sorry I got lost, and I somehow kept on turning around there, and so I'm really sorry. Welcome to the SEFA side event. We are really happy to have you here. And I just thought maybe I'll just make very quick remarks. And first of all is to point out that the issue of just energy transition became a preeminent subject of discussion at COP26. Of course, we knew there was transition, but it never acquired the prominence that it has acquired to date. But I thought maybe we also need to consider, what does this exactly mean for Africa? I think for a start, we must address the issue of the endemic energy poverty. And why do I say endemic? Number one, because we all know that half of Africa's population does not have access to electricity. 600 million people today don't have access to electricity. And another 900 million people don't have access to clean cooking. And if you were to look at consumption of energy, sub-Saharan Africa's consumption energy is one of the lowest in the world at 187 kilowatt hours per annum. Per capita is very, very low. And what this means is that in order to address this particular issue, we also know that we need to double the energy demand between now and 2040 in order to take care of increased urbanization and, of course, increased outcomes that result in greater wealth. But unfortunately, this will require a lot of resources, require about $100 billion of investments every single year. But that's one side of the equation. The side of the equation which means that to address energy poverty, we must increase the sources of energy supply significantly. But the other side of the equation, and I'm mathematically inclined, that's why I like equations, is that we must be cognizant and alive to the fact that the Paris Alignment Goal requires us to keep global warming below 2 degrees and preferably limit that to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So how do we sort of combine the two? On the one hand, Africa is well endowed with sources of generation, sources of renewable energy. You have solar. I understand that Africa has about 40% of the global potential of solar power, about 10 terawatts of power, of which less than 1% has been harnessed. We also have significant amounts of hydro, 350 gigawatts of hydropower, of which less than 7% has been harnessed. We also have geothermal, 15 gigawatts, and we have wind up to 115 gigawatts. So these are the sources of energy that could underpin Africa's energy transition. And therefore, if you combine the grid and off-grid aspects of it, we have the sources of energy that basically will underpin Africa's just energy transition. And this is where SEFA, which is the topic of today's discussion, comes in, which is a multi-donor fund at the bank and seeks to catalyze private investments in clean energy, including providing green baseload as alternative to fossil fuel baseload. In addition to offering technical assistance and concessional finance instruments to remove market barriers and enhance increased private sector participation in renewable energy. So at the bank, we are truly committed to scaling up the SEFA for the greater and more impactful outcomes, essentially being able to catalyze tens of billions of dollars for green baseload and support ultimately energy access in furtherance to the SDG 7. Of course, the magnitude of the task ahead is huge. And therefore, I'm really happy today that we have this action-oriented panel of SEFA partners who will help us think through how we can be able to go to the next level. So with these few remarks, I wish you fruitful deliberations, and I will also sit here and hear more about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for really setting clearly out the context of today's discussion. Well, as I announced already, we have some exciting news from different partners. I would first of all like the technical team to play a video from Her Excellency, the Minister of International Development of Norway, who would have really liked to be with us today. And she was, in fact, at COP last week and joined us on Friday for the high-level session on Desert to Power, but she had to go back to Norway and therefore recorded a video message. If we could play the message, that would be fantastic.
Sustainable, renewable energy is fundamental to Africa's future. Renewable energy can play a critical enabling role in Africa's socio-economic development and industrialisation. A key instrument for the African Development Bank to support the achievement of SDG 7 is the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, SEFA. Norway has supported SEFA since 2018, and we are committed to strengthen our partnership. I'm therefore pleased to announce that we will increase our support to SEFA with up to 300 million Norwegian crowns. The new support will raise the ambition of our partnership with the African Development Bank and bolster the bank's efforts on sustainable energy. We welcome the emphasis in SEFA on the nexus between energy access and food security through water and agriculture. This is a priority area for Norway. I look forward to continued cooperation, and I wish you a good luck with the event. Thank you.
Well, a big round of applause for Norway for this commitment of 300 million Norwegian kroners. For those that cannot or are not aware of the exchange rate on top of your head, that's roughly current exchange rate $29 million in new grant contributions from Norway to SEFA. So we very much appreciate that renewed support and vote of confidence of Norway in the African Development Bank and specifically in SEFA. It's now my pleasure to invite Ed Borgstein, who is the Director of Country Programs of the Global Alliance for People and the Planet, GEP, which we all know is a big new platform of cooperation. And from the African Development Bank side, we're very pleased to be one of the partners of GEP and also the president of our institution as part of the Global Leadership Council of GEP. And we're really pleased that you're able to join us, Ed. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Vice President. It's a real honor to be here today. A year ago at COP26, a group of institutions came together with the idea that there was a need for a new type of collaboration to address energy transitions and energy poverty, which are two sides of the same coin in so many ways, in so many places. And to do that through a new type of collaboration, a new way of working together. And so these 19 institutions, backed by philanthropic capital from the anchor partners of Rockefeller Foundation, IKEA Foundation, and Bezos Earth Fund, and bringing together African Development Bank and a number of the other large DFIs and a number of the global organizations really at the forefront of delivery of energy access and energy transitions in key markets, launched the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. And we've spent the last year working really together on the ground in practice, and I'll give one example of our collaboration with AfDB. In Ethiopia, we've been working together on the DREAM project, distributed renewable energy agricultural modalities. We're now launching, well, we launched the program a few weeks ago in Addis. Within the next few months, we're hoping to deploy the largest mini-grid irrigation program in Africa in partnership with the government of Ethiopia, led by the Ministry of Water and Energy, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Irrigation, of course, and brought together by the Agricultural Transformation Institute to deploy really transformative solutions where our grant capital, our joint work on the ground, and the scaling power that SEFA and African Development Bank brings will first start in nine communities that have been selected to be deployed soon, and we'll scale that up over the coming years, we think, to at least 200 communities with an agricultural-led model. It's tremendously exciting, and I think it's an exemplar of the type of impact that we can achieve really working together. And so this partnership approach where we're hand in hand delivering in country by, for country-led programs, this all is led by the 19 countries in which we're active, but also institutionally aligning and collaborating is tremendously exciting for us. So it's on that note that we're delighted to announce a contribution of $35 million US to SEFA to double down on this commitment. It's in addition to our co-investment in a number of countries, and we hope is really just the start of this relationship, which we value so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ed, and indeed, thank you very much to the Global Energy Alliance for, I think, this tremendous commitment. We're very pleased to be able to work with GIEB, and I think the example that you highlighted of Ethiopia is an excellent one, because it's really looking at the nexus between energy, agriculture, and water, and bears a lot of potential to be replicated in other countries subsequently. So again, thank you very much. It's now my distinct pleasure to invite one of the beneficiaries, because obviously we're not sort of mobilizing funds for the institution. It's really mobilizing funds to benefit ultimately the beneficiary countries in Africa. One very important country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think there's a lot of excitement at the moment, for example, when we look at the potential for mini-grids about DRC. That's also one of the priority countries for GIEB, as a matter of fact. It's certainly a very important country for the African Development Bank, and I'm therefore very pleased to invite His Excellency Mr. Olivier Mvense Mukaleng, the Minister of Water Resources and Electricity of the Democratic Republic of Congo, to just deliver a couple of remarks and sort of sharing a bit the perspective from a very important country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Monsieur le Ministre, vous avez la parole.
Well, thank you very much to the Vice President, who has left already. And, oh, no, there he is. Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for the opportunity. Thanks for everyone for coming here. Yes, I just want to say thank you again for allowing us to be part of this discussion. As you know, since last year in Glasgow, Congo is presenting itself as a country that has part of the solution. We're not going to be, we're not going to say that we have the entire solution, but we have part of the solution for this transition, whether it's the ecologic transition as well as the energetic transition. So basically, if I have to summarize it in a very few words. The solution that we're talking about is obviously the ecologic solution because of our forest, but it's directly linked to access to electricity for our people. Why is that? In Congo, most of our population, like it was said earlier, doesn't have access to electricity. By doing so, not having access to electricity will make them resort to alternative source of energy to cook. So clean cooking is not in the picture anymore, because the very first alternative is the forest. So we're going to face deforestation, to use coal as a source of energy to cook. And that is the starting point of the problem. So when we give access to electricity to our people in Africa in general, in the world, but in particular in DRC, we can expect a reduction of the pressure on our forest. So that's why we are at the center, because we know that we are sitting on the Congolese, the Bassin du Congo, and that area is a source of a lot of a very big potential in terms of forestry, and that is the base of decarbonization of some of the industrial countries. So if we want a sort of a balance between the engagement that we've embarked upon, we need to make sure that we reduce the pressure on our forest, and we can only do that by giving access to electricity to a large part of our population. Obviously, there are other sources of energy that we're looking at, such as GPL and there's other technologies as well, but fundamentals remain electricity. So we need fundings for us to be able to develop quickly solutions for our people. We have done tremendous work towards that direction already. We have decided in Congo to liberalize the sector, because once before it was the only the government was at the heart of the development of the sector. But today we are inviting the private sector to the table. We are inviting different stakeholders to come to the table so that we can quickly reduce that gap. And that's where events like this have the whole meaning. How do we access funding for countries like DRC to quickly reduce the gap in terms of energy for its population, but also to enhance social and economic development so that we create jobs, we reduce poverty in our country, and by doing so, we will have ultimately resolved the access to electricity, but also we would have addressed issues such as ecological transition. So that's basically what my introduction point would be. Let's think about how fast we can help African countries to get access to funding so that we can quickly provide electricity for our people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Maybe I can just ask you to stay with us a little bit longer, if I may. And I think you've highlighted very clearly the challenges, but also the opportunities, and clearly underscoring the importance of the private sector in making a lot of that happen. Before we move to the panel discussion, I would just like to show a couple of slides very quickly to give a little bit more impression about what the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, SEFA, is doing. If we can just show, okay. All right, let me just see if I can manage that. Oh, yes. Right. So SEFA really is very much aligned with the SDG 7 target. It has sort of the objective to contribute to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy services, and of course, promoting renewable energy solutions across the continent. SEFA has, over the last couple of years, developed in one of the leading financiers across the continent, particularly based on a number of unique features of SEFA, including kind of its engagement and focus on transition countries, its focus on also supporting local developers, its focus on first-of-a-kind projects, really those projects that require concessional capital sort of to make it happen. But of course also a focus on scale, because ultimately we will not be able to achieve the objectives that we've set if we don't reach scale. SEFA has been able over the last couple of years since inception to grow the partnership. It started with as a bilateral trust fund with support from Denmark, but has since grown into a partnership of 9 partners, and if I add now the latest partner, GEB as well, we have 10 partners, donors contributing to SEFA. So it's a great example of what partnerships and collaboration with different stakeholders can achieve. SEFA has basically 3 key pillars. One is around green baseload, and the Vice President referred to it. It's really how can we sort of support renewable that can provide the equivalent of fossil fuel-based power generation? What is sort of required to invest in power system flexibility to increase the intake of variable renewable energy in Africa's power systems? So that is a key priority that SEFA is focusing on. Having said that, we also have a very strong focus around the decentralized energy access solutions, which are so critical for Africa to achieve universal access to electricity by 2030. So this is why we have this focus around green mini-grids. And last but not least, because it's very often forgotten, energy efficiency, rather than being sort of the principal energy efficiency first, in many instances it's kind of energy efficiency as an afterthought. And that's also why we have a distinct priority under SEFA focusing on energy efficiency investments. If you can save that electricity, that's sort of the cheapest form of new kind of power generation if you want. So SEFA has sorry, this is basically the same slide. The other point I just wanted to highlight is that SEFA is a blended finance facility. So we have flexible instruments being able to support different needs through different means. One aspect is clearly a focus around technical assistance. So here we are, for example, providing support to private sector developers to help their projects reach bankability stage. And we do that very often in cooperation and partnership with other partners, such as Get Invest, to mention just one example. But also support to the public sector in strengthening the policy, legal, regulatory environment that is sort of required to attract more private sector investments. But there's a second dimension which is equally important, which is the concessional investment ability that SEFA has. So we can provide catalytic capital where it's required. For example, we can take junior positions in new funding structures, anchoring more commercially oriented investors that otherwise would not be able to invest. We can provide concessional debt that can be blended with the bank's private sector lending to make some of those projects happen that otherwise would not happen. Or we can, in the mini-grid context, provide sort of that critical viability gap funding or kind of minimum revenue guarantee type of instruments that are so critical for these type of projects to succeed. So it's really a flexible instrument able to respond to the different needs of partners. I'm not going into too much detail, but I just wanted to highlight, because Minister, you referred to clean cooking, which I think is again an area that has only in the last 2-3 years, I would say, sort of received more attention. We know all the figures with many people, particularly women and children, dying annually because of indoor air pollution. SEFA, in cooperation with the Global Clean Cooking Alliance, was the first one to support the creation of a dedicated fund focused on the private sector value chain of clean cooking. SEFA provided a critical 10 million junior equity tranche that allowed the Spark Plus Clean Cooking Fund to reach a first close earlier this year. And I'm also pleased to say that Spark Plus, and we'll hear a bit more about that, has already made a first investment in burn manufacturing. That's sort of the picture that you're seeing here. Another example, and that's, I think, very critical in the current context. We know that the multiple crises, whether that's COVID-19, the supply chain crisis, is having an impact on the energy access sector. It's having impact also on IPPs, but this is here an example where SEFA has really reacted quickly to the challenges imposed by COVID-19 through the COVID-19 off-grid recovery platform, where basically we put 20 million of highly concessional resources in the form of reimbursable grants, working through 3 funds that are already active in the energy access space, that have a pipeline, that sort of needed additional funds, the Facility for Energy Inclusion, CEMA, and Triple Jump. And these resources were deployed very quickly in support of some of the energy access companies to, well, basically cope with some of the negative impacts of the global crises. And last but not least, just as an example of our work on the technical assistance side, it's our Africa Mini-Grid Acceleration Program that is really trying to focus on working with countries in terms of what is sort of required sort of to see the scale up of mini-grid solutions, what needs to be done on the policy, legal, regulatory side, but also how can we have a degree of standardization to have sort of larger scale programs where we then can sort of also from the bank side, from other partners side, bring sort of the required financing instrument to make that happen. With that, I'll stop here. You see here the various donors that support us. I'm also very pleased to welcome Germany here, one of our big donors as well from BMZ, but it's a big partnership, and we've already included GAP here with the logo, so we're quick to react to that. So thank you very much. With that, I would like to invite my panelists to the stage. I've sort of already the Honourable Minister here with me. I would like to invite Aaron Jung, the CEO of PowerGen, to join us on the stage. Would also like to invite Dr. Heike Henn, Director for Climate, Energy, Environment at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Would like to invite Terje Osmundsen, who is the founder and CEO of Empower New Energy. I would also like to invite, now I was just trying to find the card again, the Deputy Resident Coordinator of UNDP in RDC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Oh, yes, and Geoff Sinclair, and I would just like to ask if you can bring your chair. Apologies for that. So we make the panelists work here. So thank you very much. Geoff Sinclair, who is the Managing Director of the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. I'm also pleased, maybe we can just remove the presentation. We have online connected Mr. Ash Sharma, who is the Vice President of the Nordic Green Bank. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Peter George, who is the Co-Investment Director of the Spark Plus Africa Fund. I've already been talking a little bit about Spark Plus in the brief presentation. So I think we have a very distinguished panel, different perspectives, public sector, developers, development partners, and sort of catalytic finance instruments. And yeah, I think collectively we want to sort of try to get a little bit more sense, sort of how can we achieve that scale? How can we sort of see a scale up of private sector solutions, particularly in the energy access space? So if you allow me, I will start maybe with you, Aaron, sort of just to get a little bit of a private sector perspective right at the beginning. You're obviously one of the leading investors in on-grid and off-grid distributed energy. Maybe you can sort of give a perspective, what is sort of still missing? What are sort of some of the barriers that you are still seeing sort of that need to be addressed for you to be able to scale even more?
Sure. Is this working?
Should be working.
How's this? Am I audible?
We'll go with the old school method. All right. Well, it's an honor to be here. Let's see. All right, perfect. I'll hold this. Oh. I'll leave it on the table. Well, it's an honor to be here, and appreciate the collaboration with many of the partners around the table here who have been our partners for a number of years. As a quick background, so we are PowerGen Renewable Energy. We are a power infrastructure company operating across Africa. We're present in Kenya, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and recently the DRC as well. We currently serve more than 125,000 people with clean and reliable power on a 24/7 basis. We can talk a little bit about our history. We've been active in this particular space for about 7 years, but have been on the continent for about 11, and have built up a wealth of experience and hard learnings over the years of how to do this and how to do this successfully. Maybe Daniel, to your question around what are some of the learnings and what's missing, it's been an evolution where over the last 7 years, we've gone from taking really small rural communities and proving that we can provide people with quality power, proving that we can do generation, transmission, smart metering, and retail, to now, I think, an acceptance that the sector exists and that private sector can deliver on this. So now we're not just looking at rural communities, we're also looking at very large cities, urban areas across multiple countries. I'm personally based in Lagos, and we are actively looking at taking different parts of the grid within large cities and managing them. We also do direct commercial and industrial power, so we provide solar and battery solutions directly to commercial and industrial clients. And so I think increasingly, and with much respect to progressive, like-minded folks like Your Excellency himself, we're seeing now government opening up the private sector participation. And now there's a willingness from a lot of governments to bring folks like us to support with the power sector. We're often helping utilities, so we're not always in competition. For example, in Nigeria, we're actually working together with utilities to turn around operations of existing networks. And we're increasing generation supply by supplementing with renewable generation. So we provide a pretty full stack and turnkey power infrastructure solution based on the need of a particular area. In terms of what's missing, a little bit, I'd say you posed it a little bit, but on the financing side, maybe just to give an anecdote, to build 1 megawatt of solar, it only takes a few weeks. It's actually one of the easiest parts in the entire COP discussion. But implementation is something we've done. We've done more than 325 systems. We've been in 12 countries. We've been in Somaliland, we've been in Rwanda, we've been in DRC, we've been in Mozambique. Implementation is very, very straightforward. On the flip side, probably the longest project finance deal that we worked on took about 18 to 20 months. So it took about 12x the time to build a project as it did to actually implement it. And so one of the things that we're working now with financiers, and as PowerGen, we're pretty close to closing a pretty large round. But we're working with financiers to fund directly the implementation agents, which is us, so that we can deliver at scale. And I think the ask of financiers is to mobilize that capital a lot more efficiently and a lot larger at ticket sizes that allow us to scale and deliver $50 million, $100 million, $200 million type projects. That I think will help us all achieve our goals much, much faster.
No, thank you very much, Aaron. I think that's a very clear perspective, and I mean, it is clearly sort of a relationship that cannot sort of continue. I mean, taking 10 times longer sort of to mobilize the funding than sort of the actual implementation of the project. And that's clearly also something that sort of the MDBs ourselves sort of need to look at, how we can improve sort of our internal processes, how we can sort of have the financing instruments that are quicker sort of to deploy sort of to the needs of the countries, but also to developers that are active in these markets. Just sort of on the financing question, let me allow sort of to bring in Dr. Heike Henn from BMZ. Obviously, BMZ, Germany, is sort of at the forefront of energy transition in the German context, but also a very important financier of energy access programs across the continent. So from your perspective, sort of what is needed to scale the financing required for investments in energy access, and and also maybe a perspective, sort of how can instruments such as SEFA kind of play a role in that regard?
Yeah, thank you very much. Now I try myself with the mic. But thank you for having me. Indeed, for the German government, for BMZ, that I represent here, investment in a just energy transition is really one of the key priorities. And we look at it definitely from the angle of the SDGs, of access, of opportunities for economic development, and from the angle of reaching or implementing the Paris Agreement. But I think one doesn't work without the other. So it's not only about climate, and it's not only about access and development gains. I think renewables provide really the opportunity to combine the two. Maybe I can try it like that. What is important for us regarding public and private financing or mobilizing finance? I think both have a key role to play, but it has to be more complementary and systemically connected than it is right now. Indeed, we don't have the public funds to finance the transition globally, just with public funds. And it's not only that we don't have the funds, they are not needed because it's a profitable business if we do it right. And so private sector money has to come in. And everybody is looking for green investments all over the place, but what is missing? So I think a couple of elements. I think the framework, the regulatory framework, the investment climate, enabling environment, that is something that is really key for private investors. And I think you can work on policies with countries, but you can also work as public funders with de-risking investments. So I think we need both, work on the enabling environment and also do a bit more MDBs as well as public funders with de-risking instruments. And I think listening to you, I think we also need to work more on the energy system, not only the grid, the transmission, but also the system. Because my question would be, listening to you, is this all about capacity or generation as well? I mean, the share of the renewables, what you are building, and are you always 100% sure that this will be really part of the energy generation? Because I think we have to invest more, and this is what I like also about SEFA, in the energy systems with technical assistance that make sure, if I compare to the German example, it's not so long ago that in Germany many energy providers thought that our system cannot deal with more than 7% renewables due to the fluctuation in the system. And now our objective is to have 80% renewables in the system in 2030. Because we learned how to deal with it, and that it's not, you don't need magic, or you don't even have to be digitalized. I mean, it's better and more efficient, but you can really make it happen. So it's also about capacity. And maybe a third and third and last aspect I would like to mention is also the pipeline. We need to support, and SEFA is collaborating, I think, with Jet Invest on this also. We have to work and support this publicly also with several instruments to build up the pipeline that then can be financed privately.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for those points. I think there are a number of points that I would like to pick on. Pipeline development, clearly critical aspect, but also I think I like the point that obviously renewables is a profitable business, but there are nevertheless, I would say, sort of some areas, particularly in the rural side, where there is a need for sort of those sort of concessional type of instruments, investments. And maybe sort of just to change a little bit around, Geoff Sinclair from REP, this is also precisely, I think, where REP is sort of intervening, sort of where there is sort of this viability gap, and maybe you can sort of highlight from your perspective sort of what is sort of required, and sort of also how can we sort of strengthen collaboration between sort of different instruments that sort of trying to do the same.
Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. This is not a very good karaoke setup. So my name's Jeff and I'm Managing Director of REP. REP is a $120 million facility funded by the UK government. It's a private sector facility and it's aimed at stimulating the market for small distributed renewable energy across sub-Saharan Africa. It's been going since about 2016 and during that time you know, it's done a lot of work around mobilization of pipeline and bringing that pipeline through to financial close. And that's really where there's a huge gap in the market still. If you have a bankable project, there are lots of bankers who want to bank it. But the problem is getting enough projects through the channel so that you can have bankers fighting against each other. I guess it's been said a few times that, you know, this COP is about implementation, and I guess REP is really about getting stuff done. Excuse me for the nice language. And I think what we need a lot more of is people just focusing on getting stuff done, however that happens. And in that respect, I guess, sorry for the advertisement, but REP has got stuff done. So over its existence, it's helped projects and financed projects in 18 African countries, about 25 developers, including PowerGen, which we're extremely happy to be partnering with. 1.2 million new clean energy connections during that time. And a range of other results, including some awards. So it was last year I was awarded Transformational Finance Solution of the Year by the FT and IFC. There's the background. I think, you know, what do we need more of? And I'm almost looking along the panel and saying, well, we need more of this. We need more people getting things done. We need more Empower. We need more PowerGen, we need more REP, and we need more SEFA. And we need more of these organisations working with each other to do that. And I think partnerships is an incredibly important part of getting that done. I should say we need more Spark Plus too, looking at the screen. I think the other thing we need more of is for donors and development banks to take more of the risk position. You know, part of our mandate with REP is to mobilise third-party capital, particularly private capital, and you know, we've had some success in that, but we want to do a lot more. And you know, a lot of people point at pension funds and say you should be doing this. And the pension funds aren't going to do that unless it meets their risk parameters. And so what we need to do is structure facilities so that the MDBs and the donors can mobilise that private capital without being scared of that private capital, if I put it that way. In terms of more, REP is also doing another round. So REP is fully committed at the moment. We're fundraising. And so, you know, we're also looking to expand, just like SEFA. And, you know, the next round, we're looking to mobilise another $1.5 billion into the sector. I hope that helps in the comments.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for those very clear points. And particularly like the aspect that we sort of need to be able to take more risk. I think this is precisely where instruments such as REP and SEFA come into play, because even sort of if I look at our sort of core funding, the African Development Bank, if I talk to our risk people, it's very difficult to get some of these projects through if we don't have sort of this concessional layer. That's just unfortunately the reality even for sort of the multilateral development banks. Let me bring in, before going to Peter on the Spark Plus side, I'd really like to bring in Terje first, because Empower New Energy, sort of you're also trying to develop more pipeline, and I think sort of would just like to get your perspective on sort of what is required to generate that pipeline, and also sort of what is sort of the role that sort of local commercial banks should play in that context.
Good afternoon. I did actually also prepare a presentation, but I would start and commenting, and we can maybe come back to that. In order to understand why I'm sitting here, it is probably important that I tell you the story of coming here. I was for 8 years responsible for developing SCATEC in Africa and Middle East, and we spent a lot of time from the 2009 up to 2017 in making utility scale solar bankable. And I think what we look back, I think it's clear that that was a great success, and there was lots of deals that has continued in that direction. There's a lot of things happening in that space. But what I discovered during the period is that there were no financing opportunities for local developers with smaller projects, especially in the CNI sector, 1 to 3 megawatt. The common understanding was that you will kill the project with the due diligence requirements and the cost of doing that. So that is the reason why in 2017 we founded Empower New Energy, and we raised the first small fund of 10 million US dollar, $8 million US dollar in 2019 with Electrify, Norfund, and a number of private impact investors. In that period, we have demonstrated that it's possible to actually invest from an international equity investment platform like ours, and working with local developers and local off-takers and actually financing these deals. And this is where SEFA come in, because we would never have been where we are today if we had not had the possibility to actually rely on a SEFA grant that we have to finance not the project, but to help us to finance the lawyers and technical due diligence and everything which is needed. So the great news from Empower New Energy is that 2 months ago we signed a shareholder agreement with for raising $75 million US for exactly the same market. And again, the SEFA partnership was part of that basic logic and modeling behind making it possible. Because what we see is that we want, I mean, what Empower New Energy do is trying to streamlining as much as possible, so it's possible to make equity investments in a few months' time, but there still is, of course, a lot of work to do to verify the environmental, the social, the legal, integrity, technical. Every project, whether it's 0.5 megawatt or 1 megawatt, you have to go through the same review, of course. What we have done is build a platform which is done digitally with our partners. We are very proud, very efficient, but of course the work we are doing with the support from SEFA is critical to be there. And so when responding to your question, what needs to be done more, well, actually, I was actually going to show a slide of more concrete results of a SEFA, but I can do that afterwards if you want. But to answer your question then, Daniel, what do we need more of? I think that one thing which is extremely important is to find a way to mitigate, especially we see now, currency issues in this field. I think there is of course here CFA is just one player. We know that Africa Guarantee Fund, others are working on the same. The Norwegian government has announced that it's focusing on the same. But of course the dramatic currency fluctuations we have seen, we've seen it before and we see it now, is a very important, you could say, barrier to scaling up. And I think developing instruments to kind of you could say, securitizing that risk in a larger platform, or having some kind of guarantees against currency extreme variations. I think if this is something that would certainly help in addition to what's already available. And I think that's also indirectly answer your question about the local banks. I think that this is also a very important issue for raising local finance. But we come back to that again. So this was my kind of wanted to share with you our story and the way that SEFA, the role that SEFA has played in that story. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Terje. I think it's a great story. And it's really sort of looking forward now to the next stage of implementation of Empower New Energy. I think you really highlighted a few important points around foreign exchange rate risk, which is clearly a key concern. I think also you highlighted the role that local commercial banks can play, particularly in terms of financing in local currency. Sort of trying just to bring in two additional panelists here. One is our colleague from UNDP, and obviously UNDP is sort of intervening particularly a little bit more upstream in terms of helping to create sort of that enabling environment that is needed. And I had the pleasure this morning to be part of the launch of the Africa Mini-Grids program that UNDP, with funding of the CHEF and RMI, and we're also partnering with them. So maybe you can just say a little bit about that and sort of how this work of the Africa Mini-Grids program will also sort of help and catalyze investments further downstream.
Hello? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me in this panel. I will start by thanking you for having me in this panel. Energy transition is a precondition in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, as you know. And in our perspective, the most important point to highlight here is the fact that one is the linkage we can have between the poverty, the development, the energy, the climate, and also the challenges related to our population. So what we wanted to have here is to put to avoid having the risk component in terms of having the energy transition, in terms of inequality, helping the population. So we want to put the people at the center, real center of this energy transition. So what UNDP is doing currently, we wanted to have these linkages between climate challenges, development, and also the opportunity of having energy as part of the solution. And what we, as you were here with us this morning, what we intend to do is to create the enable environment. This enable environment will touch in three specific components. One being the fact that the regulatory framework is key to enable the private sector to come in and support this kind of big projects. Another one is to have the scale-up approach in terms of investment. And to trigger this, we also need to have those conducive environment linked to the regulatory components. It's also an opportunity. This morning, we had also the opportunity to hear from some of the youth who were part of the panel, who highlighted the cumbersome approach when it comes to unlock financing, the financing of big projects related to the access to energy. I think those are the key points we really want to emphasize here. And I will also like to touch base on the investment component. On investment, it's key that SEFA will be also an opportunity to unlock this private, public, and multi-donor funding approach. So this can also contribute really to achieving the goal of having access and the potential. And taking the example of DRC, with the huge potential of DRC, 100,000 megawatt, the potential used currently is only around 2004 megawatt. So you can imagine if we give this opportunity of having access to the population to this electricity. This is why we as UNDP, we are also supporting with the mini grid approach, and all the African countries, including DRC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, I think, for those perspectives, and also good that you again highlighted the tremendous potential of DRC. And I will come back to the Honourable Minister at the end, but I just would like to bring in our two colleagues that are connected online. I know we're sort of touching a lot of things here at the same time. We've been talking a bit about utility scale, we've been talking about mini-grids, but the Minister actually in his remarks put a lot of emphasis on the importance of access to clean cooking. We mentioned Spark Plus already one or two times, so we'd really like to invite Peter George to come in, sort of tell us a little bit about Spark Plus, sort of how it was sort of set up, and particularly sort of how you look at sort of the question of scale in the clean cooking context. Peter, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much, Daniel, and great to be here. Let me just project, I have a couple of slides, so I'll project them and kind of focus on some of the most important. But before I do that, I'd just love to express our gratitude to AfDB and SEFA, not only for, of course, inviting us to participate in this event, but even more so for being a really committed and steadfast partner during what was a very long and challenging fundraising process. Our effort, to raise Spark Plus spanned about 4 years from our initial discussions with the AfDB and SEFA teams until our first closing earlier this year. Obviously, COVID didn't help that, but it was a really challenging fundraising for a number of different reasons, and without the support of AfDB and SEFA's contribution to the first loss tranche, the fund really would not have come to fruition. So really appreciate the support of SEFA and the African Development Bank team as a whole during the process. Let me share my screen here, if I can. Okay. Could you let me know if my screen is visible?
Do they have the presentation? We can see the slides, Peter, if you can just be very succinct and focusing on the key points.
Sure, of course. So I will skip ahead to sort of the overview of the fund. So Spark Plus launched in March this year and is currently at $54 million. And it's an investment fund that's thematically focused on next generation distributed cooking energy solutions in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're investing across the sort of ecosystem, across different business models, different segments of the value chain, different fuel and technology types, from design and manufacturing companies to retail and even consumer finance providers like MFIs. So we're making $500,000 to $7 million on and off balance sheet investments in various forms. And you can see some of the sort of verticals within which we're investing: biofuel sort of utility companies that are doing ethanol or pellets, companies that are distributing in various sort of business models, LPG, biogas system companies, biomass fuel producers, appliance manufacturers, and distribution and financing intermediaries. So companies that are engaged in other business models, but for whom clean cooking is a sort of another product line. The partners of the fund, Enabling Capital, is a Swiss impact investment advisory firm, which is the investment advisor. Stichting Modern Cooking, which is a TA partner and partner in the general partner of the fund. Woodman Asset Management is the AIFM, the Alternative Investment Fund Manager, and the Clean Cooking Alliance, which is the organization that I came from, was one of the sponsors of the fund and remains a technical assistance partner. And just to sort of wrap up, the investors in the fund are a mix, and this is really, I think, the power of what SEFA is bringing to the table in terms of, being able to provide catalytic capital to a fund like ours. The ability to catalyze the investment of not just other DFIs like IFU and Bio from Denmark and Belgium, but foundations like Kennyarth, Osprey Foundation, Foundation Netri in Spain, the Ashton Trust in the UK, Foundation BRM in Switzerland, but also pension funds. So we have 4 pension funds in the fund, 2 of whom are listed here, Gastrosocial and Baloise. And without the sort of funding that SEFA can bring to a fund like ours, first of all, the fund wouldn't have happened, and second of all, it certainly wouldn't have attracted the sorts of investors we have in the senior tranche, like pension funds. And then just to really wrap up, we've made 3 investments since March. The first in Burn Manufacturing, which is a leading cook stove manufacturer, originally really focused on wood and charcoal stoves, now expanding into all different sorts of technologies, originally focused on the Kenyan market, currently expanding throughout the continent, so really an exciting high growth company. Sumac Microfinance Bank, which is a fast-growing and profitable microfinance bank in Kenya that finances clean cooking solutions, and Bidasasa, which is a last-mile distribution company also operating in Kenya. Our pipeline, sort of the initial companies have been in Kenya, but we'll be soon transacting in West Africa, Southern Africa, really across the continent. So I will leave it there, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for highlighting, I think, the success of Spark Plus over, well, a longer development period, but actually having 3 investments already approved since March, I think is a good, well, benchmark of success in terms of deploying the resources relatively quickly. Let me just bring in the last panelist. It's quite a large panel, so I'm trying sort of to manage that the best I can. Ash Sharma, Vice President of the Nordic Green Bank. And in fact, Ash, you were here last week and we were on a panel on actually clean cooking. So I thought it's actually good sort of to bring you in after Peter, not only focused on clean cooking, but sort of based on your experience, sort of maybe you can give a little bit of sense where you think sort of that concessional capital, which is scarce, and climate finance more broadly is sort of going to be most impactful sort of in that question around energy access, financing the energy transition in Africa.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Okay, great. And thank you also to the AfDB and SEFA for this invitation, and congratulations on an excellent panel. Good to hear some of the real practitioners in this market. Okay, so I think that just to give you a quick update. So you're right, last week we talked about the modern cooking facility for Africa, but today I'd like to touch on the instrument that we're working with, which is called Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. And this is a results-based financing program. We're managing 127 million euros on behalf of Sweden, Denmark, Norway, which was announced last week, and the German governments. And the idea here really is to provide de-risking. We want to support companies, sustainable businesses, which are working in either space. So with the BGFA, it's in the off-grid electricity space, and with the MCFA, that's of course in clean cooking. But they both work on similar similar platforms. And what we want to do really is to come in at the back end of the financing. So these are projects which are in essence fully financed. We are very keen, of course, to leverage our existing public capital. And the idea really is that when companies bid in, so we have competitions for this, when companies bid in, they've got to demonstrate that they have a certain amount of funding up front, co-financing, if you will. And of course, going forwards, they have to leverage more financing. The aspiration, of course, is that we would use the contracts that we have, the results-based financing contracts that we offer these companies as kind of offtake agreements for connections, if you will, and that can then be leveraged for those companies to use as quasi-security for raising more finance. That's the idea. That's the idea. That's what we want to do. And you know, to a great extent, we would like to see more guarantee instruments in the marketplace. This is the holy grail, if you will, trying to get local commercial financial institutions engaged in these types of activities. I think the model is working. We are seeing that, you know, in Zambia, for example, the pilot program rapidly reached 1 million beneficiaries. And that was called Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia. We've scaled that up now, and we're at in the last 3 years we've now reached 12 agreements, reaching about 750,000 connections. Yeah, so it can work, and it can provide comfort for lenders. We've seen in the pilot phase we had leveraging in the order of 1 to 4. So for every euro that we support in results-based financing, you're seeing 4 mobilized in private and other public capital, but mainly private capital. So yeah, we see that there are lots of opportunities. We would like to support companies in unlocking more of this green financing from commercial sources, and we see that results-based financing is a very effective tool for doing that. We also see that there's a need in many cases for catalytic upfront payments as well. So we do have some advanced payment possibilities. In the case of clean cooking, this tends to be non-recoverable. So it's essentially a catalytic grant, whereas in the clean energy space, the electricity space, we're providing this as an advance on future deliveries of those connections. What more to say? I think what we found is that this has worked rather well, particularly with solar home systems, the solar home system providers, which are provided with incentives to go up country. It's in essence to go where they wouldn't normally go, i.e. working primarily in urban and peri-urban areas. And by de-risking their expansion, we support them to work in the rural areas, and that's worked rather well. Rather less well for mini grids. So we have around 3/4 of our portfolio currently is in the solar home system area, and around 1/4 with mini grids. So we're looking to close more deals in the mini grid space. And the final thing I would say is I think flexibility is very important for providers of financing. And what we provide is, in essence, equity-like. It's grant funding, but it's equity-like. So we don't specify what they should use the financing for. They can use it for inventory. They can use it for working capital. They can use it for whatever purpose they want, as long as it's reasonable to us. So again, it allows the flexibility for the companies who know best what to do with the funding. So there's a difference there between the sort of traditional milestone-based grants.
Thanks.
So yeah, maybe I'll stop there if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Ash, for highlighting these points. Particularly, I like the aspect about flexibility, because that is indeed critical. I think we sort of need to have the instruments that are flexible, that can adapt to changing circumstances and also respond to the needs of the private sector. The Beyond the Grid Fund, I mean, we sort of deliberately sort of invited a number of sort of the partner institutions with which we work, whether it's the Beyond the Grid Fund, whether it's REP, some others that are obviously not here, but because I think it's important that we sort of see how we can join forces to really deliver the impact. It's not one institution or one funding instrument, it's sort of collectively where we're going to make the difference. Well, I want to go back to the Minister. Minister, you have heard all the interventions. You have heard the strong interest, what the private sector is doing. You have heard the various instruments, facilities that are available. Sort of what are your sort of key takeaways? And sort of if you bring that back down to the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, sort of what are your sort of couple of key takeaways from the discussion this afternoon?
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think it was said here already. Let me set up for the karaoke as well. It was well said here. I think it's a combination of public, that would be us on the government side, and the private sector to come together to create that environment that can accelerate and facilitate the key issues that I take away here for us as government is first of all to put in place some policies that will create an environment for investors, whether it's private sectors, donors, or any other stakeholders to come in. And by doing so, we need to have a very good legal framework that will make all the investors at ease in terms of coming to invest in countries. We all know that Africa is regarded as a risk area when it comes to investment. So let's work on that by putting in place regulations. Like in DRC, for example, a few years ago, we have started liberalization of the sector. So now the private sector can come in and help out in the energy sector. But we have put in place a regulatory body that can regulate the sectors. That I'm sure makes the investors more confident to come in. We're looking at the doing business climate because we're looking at a lot of issues in Africa, such as corruption and all that. So we need to make sure that the climate is also conducive for investors to take place. And in that regard, for example, in DRC, we are thinking of a one-stop shop for all the investors. Instead of running around between different services, areas, ministries, to go and get all the legal documents for you to invest, you would have one place where you go, you have a list of the requirements, and then if you comply, off you go, you can invest. That is on the part of the government, something that can make sure that investors are more comfortable. Obviously, we talked about de-risking. We have to facilitate that de-risking process. And one of the key issues here is taxation, for example. As government, we're setting targets. We say, for example, we want to reach a rate of electrification in the country to, say, 30% by 2030. But what do we do on our part to make sure that we boost that investment? Well, taxation is one thing that we're looking at in DRC, for example, making sure that we exonerate the equipment that comes in the country when it comes to the energy sector. So all the equipment, for example, when it comes to solar equipment or any other equipment in there, should not be taxed, or that highly taxed, I would say, so that we encourage investors to bring in that material. So I think it's as I said, both ways. On the private sector, to take more risk, obviously, to trust more the environment, to trust that Africa is on board today. The different governments, a lot of the governments have traveled around in Africa, and a lot of the governments, they understand that they have to come on board, so they are willing to assist. But on the government side as well, to create that environment that will make everybody comfortable so that we can accelerate this funding and investors. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think a very clear vision of the government of DRC. I would sort of summarize it as DRC is open for business, and I'm sure there's a lot of interest from around the table and in the audience in the opportunities that DRC presents. I would like to invite everyone, just 30 seconds, not more, if you sort of could make one recommendation, and you can sort of direct that towards the policymakers, you can direct it towards the financiers or towards the developers. What would that recommendation be in order sort of to achieve the scale? Maybe we can start with Geoff Sinclair on the other side. Sort of one recommendation, and to whom would that recommendation be addressed?
Look, I'm going to make two. One is to donors and DFIs, which is to work with the private sector. Don't be scared of them. I'm going to use two numbers, $100 billion a year and $1 trillion a year. And that's the gap between pledged public finance, but not yet reached, and the estimates of the total amount of finance required, and have to come from the private sector. I think the second is to policymakers, and I think it's fantastic that DRC is taking such a progressive approach. I particularly like the one-stop shop. We are working on investments in DRC at the moment, and I think a lot of governments could adopt similar approaches and help make developers' jobs easier, so that they don't spend so much time sitting outside a government official's office.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will also highlight three main points. The first one is the fact that energy transition is a precondition for sustainable development goals. So we should work towards this achievement. The second one has to do with the fact that the energy investment, we need a bold investment on energy. The de-risking factor needs also to come forward in the approach. And thirdly, the regulatory, the policies, conducive policies, coherent public policies to enhance and have a conducive environment to attract public-private partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Terje, I see a lot more recommendations coming. No, Terje, please go ahead.
It's okay, it's fine. I think
No. I think, yeah, thank you.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, what I would like to say at the end is that we need more speed. While we are sitting here and while we are making these programs, the reality on the ground, unfortunately in Africa, is that fossil fuels are still increasing their market shares on very significant parts of the market. New diesel gensets are being installed every hour, new fuel consumption. So what we are doing is too slow. We need to do much more scale up, increase speed. And in order to do so, I think what the governments can do, and this very much relates to what is said here also from the Minister of Congo, I think if you want, for instance, as a government to make sure that investors can move quickly on mini grids, I think the key consideration is that there must be a guaranteed tariff. I mean, the guaranteed tariff doesn't need to be very high. There will be a risk for investors, but knowing that regardless of what happens, when you deliver electricity, there is some minimum payment that is made. That is the kind of of, I think, and this can be done maybe in combination with carbon credits, the new following up of Article 6 discussions which are taking place here, finding arrangements so that all solar-driven hybrid mini-grids installations on the ground, distributed, can have a minimum revenue. That is what I see can really speed up. And when it comes to SEFA, if you may allow me, I think also SEFA can improve. we spend, I mean, the procurement rules, and of course we understand that African Development Bank and SEFA needs to have lots of procedures and things in place, and that's comforting. But I think you have to think about that small companies like ours with 15 employees, sometimes we feel that the documentation and the processes of SEFA could be simplified to go quicker. So I think we all should move quicker, SEFA, AfDB, investors, governments, because it's urgent and there's a lot to do on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terje. I think it's a call for speed, and I hear you on the procedures procurement. We'll certainly have more of these discussions internally with our procurement colleagues, so it's not falling on deaf ears. Dr. Hen.
Yeah, thank you. My last chance to try to sing and try the karaoke. So what would I suggest? For all of us being more bold and more ambitious, think big. Just today out of Bali came the news of a new JET-P, Just Energy Transition Partnership with Indonesia, following up on South Africa last year. Very encouraging, but why not having really the bold plan to be 100% powered by renewables, like for countries like the DRC, in 2030. I mean, we agreed with Kenya on such a roadmap until 2030, but Kenya has already a very high level of renewables. But so then take 2040, but having like a bold plan on the side of a country like the DRC, then finding partners that are coordinating behind the bold plan of a country. And I would encourage development partners like Norway, the UK, others. I mean, we as Germany want to then engage also specifically with climate and energy policy related financing. So also support a country with basically sector and budget support, while only agreeing on key policy elements to create this enabling environment. And then MDBs coming in with really taking up also risk, supporting what a country has a vision, and we from the public side are supporting. And if we, three of us, are working on this, then I'm very sure that the private sector will say, oh, great environment, enabling environment, and come in and finance many of the programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for also clear recommendation here, maybe as far as DRC is concerned. Aaron, please.
Sure. For me, recommendation, I guess, to all of us is speed and scale. Let's go fast and let's go big. So for donors, let's set up the de-risking investments and mechanisms in a simple way, in a fast way at scale. For the governments, let's set up the stable enabling policies, and let's empower the implementers to deliver power to people in a clean manner. We have 99% power reliability. We have a customer satisfaction score that would be in the 99th percentile of all power companies around the world. So we're ready to do this at scale. So let's go fast and let's go big.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. Just maybe quickly, Peter and Ash, but just 30 seconds before we close with the minister. Ash,
Sure.
you want to go first? Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sure. Thank you very much. I mean, I would echo what many on the panel have already mentioned. I think with regards to clean cooking in particular, you know, this is a product type that, you know, many people are not necessarily aware of. The sort of modern cooking solutions, people have been cooking in a certain way for for generations, for a very long time. And so, you know, this is a product where, you know, we really need the support of government to improve the unit economics as much as possible and make the solutions as affordable as possible. Both the stoves, the appliances, but also the fuel through import duty exemptions, as the gentleman from DRC mentioned, VAT, zero rating on VAT, for fuel. I think this is where the government can really support the private sector to deliver these solutions sustainably and at a cost that consumers will adopt them.
Thanks, Peter. Ash, your final words?
Okay, thank you so much. Great comments. I would just add, possibly which hasn't been added, is I think there's a need for development partners and organizations like ourselves to provide institutional capacity building. We have a very good example of an off-grid task force, which has been working in Zambia, helping to overcome investment barriers. And that's a multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder grouping that's worked really well. And secondly, not to forget that there's still a lot of technical assistance that's needed to support companies to meet particularly the safeguards and the policies that we as international financial institutions impose on companies. For good reason, I must say, for good reason. But I think we need to provide that TA, particularly to locally owned companies, which is what we're doing under the BGFA in both cases. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ash. Capacity building, technical assistance. Honourable Minister, you have the final word of this exciting panel discussion.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks again to the African Development Bank Group for the opportunity to come and share and discuss. I think everything has been said here, but what I can pinpoint on is to encourage discussions between the private sector and the government, maybe share more successful stories on the continent, because sometimes we sit with issues, but you as private sector, you've been in a different country and you find solutions that we don't know of. Maybe that exchange of successful stories can make us react more quickly and give solutions to our people. So apart from that, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think sharing of best practice is a very important aspect. I know we're already slightly over time. We're not going to make big concluding remarks. I think I would just like to sum it up, I guess, in 3 points. The first one is there's a need for speed. I think that came across very clearly. The opportunity cost of not having access, not having the renewables is extremely high. There's a need for scale up. I think there's a lot of good examples happening, but not at the scale required to really make a dent on energy access and the challenges Africa is facing. And I would also like to add, maybe the third one is a need to synergize to make sure that the various efforts of the different partners come together in a synergetic, harmonious way, rather than sort of having parallel efforts that distract the limited capacities that governments have to deal with these issues on a daily basis. So I would really like to thank you all. I would like to thank this fantastic panel. Please give a big round of applause. Thank you very much.